I was just packing my suitcase when she appeared at the doorway, her voice low, almost trembling. "Don't pack tonight," she said. "Stay with me instead." In that single moment, the line between landlady and tenant became something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. I remember that night with a strange kind of clarity. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the walls of the old house were holding on to something unsaid. I had been packing quietly in my room, folding clothes with more care than they deserved, the suitcase already half full at the foot of my bed. I wasn't leaving forever, just preparing for a short trip, but something about the act made it feel final, like I was closing a chapter. The floorboards creaked in the hallway, and before I could look up, she was there, my landlady. She leaned against the doorframe, one hand resting lightly on the wood, the other holding a mug that carried the faint scent of chamomile tea. She wasn't dressed for company, just a soft cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, her hair falling loosely, strands catching the lamplight, but even in that simplicity, she carried herself with a grace that caught me off guard. Her eyes drifted to the open suitcase, then back to me. "You're really leaving tonight?" she asked, her tone calm, though it carried a note of something deeper. Concern? Curiosity? Maybe something she wasn't ready to name. I smiled faintly, trying to keep my voice light. "Just a few days. I'll be back before you notice I'm gone." But the truth is, I wanted her to notice. I wanted her to care. The silence stretched, filled with the quiet tick of the clock on my desk. She didn't move away. Instead, she took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze lingering on me longer than felt casual. There was nothing inappropriate in the way she looked at me, but it wasn't distant either. It was the look of someone who saw me, not just as a tenant paying rent, but as a person who had somehow slipped into her quiet world. I tried to return to folding clothes, but every small rustle of fabric sounded too loud in the stillness. My hands slowed, fumbling over a shirt, until I finally gave up and sat on the edge of the bed. "I didn't mean to disturb you," I said. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You never do." The way she said it, soft, steady, with just enough weight to make me wonder what else was hidden behind those words. I became acutely aware of everything. The faint warmth radiating from the heater, the gentle sway of the curtains, the delicate scent of her perfume, familiar yet always stirring something in me. The distance between us wasn't far, but it felt like miles of hesitation. She stepped just a little closer, her fingers brushing the doorframe as though to steady herself. "It's strange," she murmured, almost to herself. "This house feels emptier when you're not in it." Her words caught me off guard, leaving me with nothing but the pounding of my own heartbeat. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust what might come out if I did. And in that moment, before anything else was said, before she gave me the words that would change everything, I realized something. This wasn't just a house I rented a room in. And she wasn't just a landlady. This night was already different. She lingered in the doorway longer than she usually did. I could feel her presence even when I tried to busy myself with folding, pretending that I hadn't noticed how quiet she'd become. The suitcase sat open, a silent witness between us, clothes stacked neatly like I was trying too hard to convince myself that leaving was the right thing to do. When I finally looked up, her eyes weren't on the clothes anymore. They were on me, searching, thoughtful, almost hesitant. There was something in her gaze I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the distant politeness of a landlady checking in on her tenant. It wasn't the casual small talk we'd shared so many nights in the kitchen. It was deeper. I set a shirt down slowly, feeling her silence press in on me. "It's just for a few days," I said, almost defensively, though she hadn't asked. "I'll be back before," she cut me off, not with sharpness, but with something softer, more fragile. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the stillness like it was the only sound that mattered. "Don't pack tonight," she said. I froze, hands resting on the edge of the suitcase. The words hung between us, heavy, impossible to ignore. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd misheard. But then she added, after the smallest pause, her tone trembling with honesty she rarely let show, "Stay with me instead." The air shifted. Suddenly the room felt warmer, tighter, as if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen. My throat went dry, and I couldn't find an immediate response. Because how was I supposed to answer something like that? I turned toward her fully, and she didn't look away. Her hand still rested against the doorframe, steadying herself, though the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed her calm exterior. Her eyes carried both confidence and vulnerability, the look of someone who had thought carefully before speaking, yet still feared what might come next. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure if she realized just how much those words meant, or how much I wanted to believe she truly meant them. "Are you?" I started, but the words faltered. "Do you mean, yes?" Her answer came before I finished, quiet but firm. "I don't want the house to feel empty tonight. I don't want to feel alone." She stepped further into the room, closing the distance by only a few feet, but it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. The soft lamplight caught in her hair, and I could smell the faint trace of chamomile from the mug she still held. I swallowed hard, every instinct torn between caution and the pull of something undeniable. My voice felt smaller than I intended when I finally spoke. "You know I'll come back, right? Even if I leave, I'll..." She shook her head gently, cutting me off again. "It's not about you leaving. It's about tonight. I want you here, with me." Her words carried no command, no pressure. Just honesty. And in that honesty, there was a kind of invitation I had never expected, quiet, fragile, and more powerful than anything else she could have said. I didn't move. Not yet. But the decision was already stirring in me, beating in time with my racing heart. Tonight, everything was different. I don't know how it happened, but the suitcase was forgotten. One moment I was folding clothes with shaky hands, and the next I was standing beside her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pretending this was all ordinary. Pretending the words she had just spoken weren't still echoing inside me. She moved around the kitchen with a quiet rhythm, opening cupboards, setting things on the counter. It was late, too late for cooking, but she insisted anyway. "If you're staying, you should at least eat," she said with a half-smile, not looking at me. I could hear the layer beneath her words, though. "If you're staying, I need something to keep my hands busy." The kitchen light was softer than the one in my room, golden and warm, spilling across the countertops. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound until she handed me a knife and a cutting board. "Chop these," she instructed, sliding over a few vegetables. Her tone was casual, almost playful, but there was an undercurrent, like she was afraid of silence, afraid of what might come if we stood still for too long. So I chopped. Slowly. Clumsily. She laughed when I fumbled with the knife, the sound light and unguarded. It was the first time that night I heard her laugh, and it loosened something in my chest. "You cook like someone who's lived on takeout," she teased. "And you watch like someone who's judging every move," I shot back, grinning despite myself. For a little while, the tension eased. We talked about nothing: the weather, a neighbor's dog that barked too much, the silly way I held the knife. It felt like an escape, like we had agreed silently to step away from the heaviness of earlier. But even in the laughter, there was something else underneath. Each glance we shared seemed to last a beat too long. Each brush of her sleeve against mine left a warmth that lingered. When the food was finally ready, a simple stir-fry, nothing more, we sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The air was filled with steam, with the clink of cutlery, with the quiet intimacy of two people who had chosen not to be alone. She rested her chin on her hand, watching me as I took a bite. "So," she said softly, "tell me about where you're going. About what you're looking for." I hesitated, then admitted the truth. "I don't really know. I keep telling myself I'm searching for something, but I'm not sure what it is." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I thought she might reach across the table. Instead, she just studied me, her eyes reflecting something I couldn't quite put into words: pride, maybe, or longing. "You'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "But you don't always have to go looking far to find what matters." The words hung there, quiet but heavy. I felt the brush of her foot against mine under the table, not deliberate, not withdrawn. And suddenly, the meal didn't feel simple anymore. It felt like a step, small, ordinary on the surface, but carrying us somewhere neither of us had dared to go before. The dishes were left in the sink, half-rinsed, forgotten. Neither of us seemed to care. Instead, we carried our tea into the living room, settling into the quiet like two people who didn't want the night to end. She curled into the corner of the couch, cardigan pulled around her, one leg tucked beneath her. I sat at the other end, trying to appear relaxed, though my heart hadn't slowed since she first told me to stay. The lamp in the corner cast a soft glow, leaving most of the room in shadow. It felt safe that way, as though we could say more in the dimness than we ever would in the light. For a while, we talked about safe things. Movies she liked, places I wanted to see. Our voices stayed hushed, almost conspiratorial, as if the house itself might overhear. But gradually, her tone shifted, and the silences between her words grew longer. She stared into her cup for a moment, then spoke softly, like she was telling me something she hadn't planned to. "It's strange, you know. This house has so many rooms, but some nights it feels empty. Like the walls are closing in, reminding me what's missing." Her eyes lifted to mine briefly before darting away, as if she regretted saying it aloud. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just let her speak, sensing she needed someone to hear what she hadn't shared with anyone else. "I never thought I'd end up here, living alone," she continued, her voice carrying a quiet ache. "There was a time I imagined a different life, more laughter in these halls, more people at this table. But time, it doesn't always give you what you thought you'd have." Her words lingered, carrying a weight I hadn't felt before. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on my knees. "It doesn't mean it's too late," I said softly. "Maybe it just means the story isn't finished yet." She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes shimmered in the low light, filled with something raw, something she usually kept hidden. For a moment, she didn't speak. Instead, she exhaled slowly, setting her cup down on the table. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but charged. I could hear the faint hum of the heater, the tick of the clock, even the rustle of fabric as she shifted slightly closer. "I don't say this to many people," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you make this house feel less lonely. When you're here, it feels alive again." My chest tightened, and I didn't think. I just reached across the space between us and placed my hand gently over hers. Her skin was warm, her fingers still, but she didn't pull away. Her lips curved into a small, almost fragile smile. "You're too young to understand what that means to me," she said quietly, though there was no judgment in her tone, only vulnerability. I held her gaze, refusing to let it slip away. "Maybe," I admitted. "But I understand how it feels to need someone. And I understand what it means to have you here tonight." For a heartbeat, the world outside the living room didn't exist. There was only the weight of her hand under mine, the warmth in her eyes, and the quiet knowledge that something between us had shifted, permanently, undeniably. The night had stretched on quietly, but neither of us seemed willing to end it. After her confession, after I placed my hand over hers, there was no going back to ordinary conversation. We both knew it. The air had changed. She suggested we move to the living room sofa, closer to the fireplace, though the fire hadn't been lit. Maybe it was an excuse to sit nearer, to close the space that the wide couch seemed determined to keep between us. We sat side by side this time, not across from one another. The cushion dipped under our weight, and suddenly the world felt smaller. The soft hum of the heater filled the silence, and in that silence, every detail sharpened, the faint brush of her knee against mine, the way her cardigan sleeve grazed my arm whenever she shifted, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. I didn't know where to rest my hands. They twitched against my knees, restless, until she reached forward and adjusted my collar, smoothing the fabric with careful fingers. It was such a small gesture, but it sent a rush of heat through me. "You always leave your collar uneven," she said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. I forced a smile, though my chest tightened with something I couldn't name. "Guess I never had anyone to fix it for me." Her hand lingered longer than necessary, fingers brushing against the base of my neck. Neither of us moved. The warmth of her touch radiated through me, stronger than any words could. When she finally pulled her hand back, the absence of it felt louder than the ticking clock on the wall. We both sat still, caught in a pause that stretched like a thread pulled taut. She turned her face toward me, her eyes searching mine, questioning, daring, yet still hesitant. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every instinct told me to lean in, to close the space that suddenly felt unbearable. But I didn't. I couldn't. The risk of breaking the moment, of shattering something delicate, kept me frozen. Instead, we just looked at each other. It was strange how powerful silence could be. Her eyes softened, her breathing slowed, and I realized she was waiting for me to decide, to be the one to bridge the unspoken. The clock on the mantel chimed softly, marking the hour, but neither of us flinched. We were suspended in that moment, two people balanced on the edge of something neither had dared to name aloud. Her knee pressed a little more firmly against mine, intentional this time. My fingers twitched again, then stilled, as though even a small movement would tip the balance. She broke the silence first, her voice low and unsteady. "This feels dangerous, doesn't it?" I swallowed hard, my own voice catching. Only if we pretend it's not real. Her lips curved into a faint, almost sorrowful smile, and she leaned back slightly, as if torn between retreat and surrender. The space between us felt thinner than air itself. We didn't cross it, not yet. But in that charged stillness, in the closeness of her presence and the weight of her gaze, we both knew. We were already past the point of return. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud against the hush of the living room. We sat there, knees touching, eyes locked, two people circling the truth like it was fire, drawn to it, yet afraid to get burned. She was the first to look away. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the rain had begun to tap softly against the glass. Her voice followed, quiet, fragile in a way I had rarely heard from her. "I didn't ask you to stay because I was worried about you leaving," she said. Her words were slow, deliberate, as though she'd rehearsed them in her mind 100 times. "I asked you to stay because I wanted you here. With me." Her confession settled into the room like the final piece of a puzzle, clicking into place. I felt the weight of it in my chest, a warmth spreading through me that was equal parts joy and disbelief. I leaned forward, searching her face. "You mean that?" My voice was softer than I intended, almost boyish in its uncertainty. She turned back to me then, and her eyes, steady, shimmering in the dim light, told me everything her words hadn't yet. "I mean it more than I've meant anything in a long time." The tremor in her voice betrayed how much it cost her to say it, how much she was risking in this moment. She wasn't just offering me company. She was offering me trust, vulnerability, the kind of honesty that can't be taken back once spoken. My chest tightened, and before I could second-guess myself, I spoke the truth I'd been holding in. "I've felt the same. For months. I just didn't know if I was allowed to." Her breath caught, and she let out a soft, almost relieved laugh. "Allowed?" She shook her head slightly, her hand brushing against mine on the cushion between us. "This isn't about rules. It's about what we feel. And I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." Her hand lingered against mine, trembling just slightly. I turned my palm upward, closing my fingers gently around hers. The simple act felt monumental. Her hand fit into mine as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. Neither of us moved quickly. There was no rush, no urgency. Just a slow, careful leaning into what had always been there. I shifted closer, the space between us dissolving, until I could feel the warmth of her breath against my cheek. She hesitated for only a second, her eyes searching mine, as if asking for permission. And I gave it, not in words, but in the steady way I held her gaze. She leaned in, pressing the lightest kiss against my cheek. It wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was tender, lingering, full of everything we hadn't said until now. My chest ached with the weight of it, a sweetness so fragile I was afraid to breathe too hard and break it. When she pulled back, her forehead rested lightly against mine. We stayed like that, eyes closed, sharing the silence as though it was a vow. For the first time that night, I stopped questioning. I just let myself feel. The kiss faded, but its weight stayed with me, pulsing in my chest long after her lips left my cheek. She kept her forehead against mine, her hands still clasped in mine as though neither of us dared to let go. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her, only me, only the warmth we had both been too afraid to admit we needed. When she finally leaned back, her eyes softened. You don't have to decide anything tonight, she whispered, as though she didn't want to frighten the moment away. I just wanted you to know. But I had already decided. The suitcase upstairs was still open, half full, clothes folded in neat piles that suddenly felt like strangers to me. That plan, that departure, no longer mattered. What mattered was the woman sitting in front of me, her vulnerability laid bare, her trust given without condition. I don't want to leave, I said, my voice steady now. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face before it melted into something softer. Relief. Gratitude. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. She exhaled, a sound that carried years of loneliness, years of holding herself together. Then she shifted closer, letting her head rest gently against my shoulder. I felt the weight of it, not heavy, but grounding, like an anchor pulling me into something real. The room felt quiet again. The rain outside had grown steadier, a soft percussion against the windows. Inside, the lamp hummed faintly, and the warmth of the heater wrapped around us. But more than that, there was the warmth of her body leaning into mine, the subtle rhythm of her breathing syncing with my own. I wrapped an arm around her almost instinctively, pulling her closer. She didn't resist. Instead, she let out a breath that sounded like surrender, not to me, but to the moment itself. To the simple truth that neither of us had to be alone anymore. We didn't speak for a long while. Words felt unnecessary, almost clumsy compared to the quiet intimacy of shared stillness. My eyes drifted to the table across the room, where her abandoned teacup still sat, steam long gone. Ordinary objects, ordinary life, and yet everything felt transformed. When she finally did speak, her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. It feels different, doesn't it? Like the house isn't so empty anymore. I tightened my hold around her, resting my cheek against her hair. It doesn't feel empty at all, I murmured. Not with you here. The weight of my words settled into the space between us, not as a promise I couldn't keep, but as a truth I already knew. I wasn't leaving tonight. I wasn't packing. I wasn't walking out of the door pretending this house was just a place to stay. Her fingers curled gently against my chest, and for the first time, I felt her body completely relax into mine. It was a small thing, but it meant everything: trust, acceptance, the quiet beginning of something new. The rain kept falling outside, steady and soothing, as we sat wrapped in the kind of silence that no longer felt lonely. And in that moment, I understood, what started as an invitation had become a choice. We weren't just sharing a house anymore. We were sharing something far deeper, a life, a bond, a fragile, beautiful love that neither of us had expected, but both of us had found.